Hello world and welcome. My name's Don, and in today's video we'll be looking once again at DxO Photolab 6, and in particular today's video is about local adjustments. Now this video was first a spark in the back of my mind as I was processing an image, and I ended up, in order to get what I wanted, applying two control lines more or less one over top of the other, just each of them picking up on slightly different details. I couldn't get a complete mask all in one. And I thought something like that might be worth sharing. It might be something people haven't tried, or something that might help out. So I started with that, and then once I went down that path of thinking about local adjustments, it sort of led to the video that I have today, which is essentially me attempting to share things that I've noticed, things that I believe I know about local adjustments in DxO. So let's jump in and take a look. So here's my image, a bit of a nostalgic image for me. So this is from way back when we very first moved to New Zealand. We were actually living in a place that I think was right about here. And then this is an estuary that sort of fills up based on the tides. There's always a little bit of water in it, but by times this spot that I'm standing on would actually be filled with water as well. But anyway, I was going through some old images, and I started out with the idea for this video because I just wanted to kind of just fix this up a little bit, and I was looking at those clouds and wondering to myself if I could get any detail out of those. And then that led me to some masking, and then that led me to think, well, that might actually be an interesting little tip to share. So it's kind of just grown from there. So I was just going through some old images, found this one, and we'll take it from there. So I've hit reset on this. Yep, I have indeed. And you can see here and you'll be experiencing this too if you're using DxO. Most likely, I guess probably there are some settings you can do to change this behavior, but right now I've got it so that it'll show me these black areas once it's done some lens correction. And I quite like that, and it's actually given me, so I've got this Reshape feature, which for a while I was a bit unsure what to do with, but I actually at this juncture, I like this because I can, this in places where it's not going to matter, it's only a little bit, I can just stretch out a little bit there to fill that up. Something like sky, you'd never in a million years know that it happened. I'll just grab a slightly smaller grid. Might be too small. Let me go back here. Yeah, this one should be fine. And I'll just drag that out a little bit. So it's not affecting the whole image. It's just sort of right where that's at. Did I miss that? Maybe I just zoom out a little bit so that I can get at my edges easier. Just you can take your time and just do enough so that you're not stretching the pixels any more than you need to, but you can just sort of recover that if you're so inclined. So finally have a use for this. I don't do a lot of this kind of warping in many situations. Why can I not get a hold of that handle? There it goes. And suddenly too much all at once, and my Photolab has stopped working. This is the second time I've had a crash, and I historically have not had a lot of crashes from DxO. So I'm really curious whether or not, because I just reasonably recently updated to, what's it on, 6.4 now. I'm really curious as to whether or not 6.4 has some instabilities in it. Anyway, for speed's sake, because this video is not about that, I will just go ahead and crop this one, and here, I'll just leave the auto. It'll crop those black bits out, and that will be fine. I've already minimized this side. I'm just going to pull this down just to give me some more space, and off we go. I'll like to leave the histogram there. You see if I drag it back over by the edge, it'll redock itself. But if you're curious about how I got the histogram like that, literally just grab it and pull it out, and then put it in there. The only thing to be careful of is like I just showed you, if I go over too far to the left with this, it'll try to redock itself. So you need to be a little bit careful where you place it. So, all right. So what about the what about the masking side of things here? So first of all, I'm just going to come here and maybe just bring that down a bit. That's probably fine. So starting things out, masking. So I'm using the local adjustments for my masking. And you can use I think the masking in DxO is really great. I have to say, having had recent experience where I was trying to do something very particular with portrait, and I wanted the subject selected, and I wanted to impact the background, that the new tools in Adobe Camera Raw or Lightroom, I have to give them their kudos. They are absolutely leading the way. But for most things, most times, I don't need that level of detail, and having things tidy and easy and quick to use is preferable to me. So I'm quite happy to stick with the DxO tools here. So local adjustments. I'll click on that, and I want to impact my sky. And if I just do a quick right click, I'll get my different local adjustment possibilities in here, and I'm going to use the control line for this one because I want to impact the sky and I want it to come right down to where the hills are. So I'll just go ahead and click and drag, and essentially this is giving me sort of a fade out area. So if I grab this, I'll just bring it up and put it on the blue. So that's, going to be quite representative of what I'm hoping to select. And if I do my mask, you can see how it's being selected, and you can see that there's a little bit of grayness through here. I mean, these hills here will get impacted just a little bit. And also I think maybe a little, I'm going to just drag this down a touch. Yeah, you can see that just got a little cleaner down to the edge. So I'll put that a little closer to the edge there, and I will just see what I can do with this. So I'm going to just up that a little bit. Maybe up that a little bit. I don't want to go too far because you can see as I'm doing that, I'm masking the hills, but I'm also starting to mask some of these areas up here. They're still, because they're gray, so I mean black means not being impacted, white means being fully impacted, and various levels of gray, partially impacted. So this will be partially impacted, but not fully impacted when I drag things down. So that might be all right. So go ahead and press M on my keyboard again to make the mask go away again. And I can just drag that down a little bit. And I find that, sometimes I do look at the masks, but sometimes it's best to just look at the actual image, see what the result is. Because sometimes if things are just selected just a little bit, it doesn't actually detract from the image in any way. And in fact, it helps to blend things in so that the edits aren't as noticeable. So I've done that small, what's that, about a third of a stop down. But these clouds are still, when I did that mask, there wasn't a tidy way to get the sky separated from the hills and get this included. It wasn't easy to include. So what you can do, one moment here, so I come out of here, press M again to make that go away. What you can do is actually just add a second one. So I'm going to, now, this is an interesting bit. I'll do this first and then I'll go back and do what I should have done. This one's selected. And so if I do this a second time, I put a second one on, you notice it doesn't get its own controls. And that's telling me that it's actually a child of this one. It's inheriting this one's edits, if you know what I mean. So if I just delete that one, deselect that one, now you can see the controls have gone away. It's not blue there, so that's deselected. Now if I do another one, it will be its own independent one, and it gets its own set of controls. So that's an important bit. And when I'm done this, I'll go through some of the others. But for now, I want to get at those whites. Press my mask. Awesome, looking good. And it's blending into, I think that, I'm going to try it. I think that might be actually a really nice selection. A little bit selected there. I wonder, I maybe just put my Luma up just a smidgen. One more. Yeah, try that. Try that. And you notice I'm just oftentimes small changes make a big difference. So it's worth taking your time with it, and you can yoink it all the way one or the other just to see, but a lot of times I find small changes are what actually works in the end. And then with this, so I'm especially thinking about those highlights. So what can I get out of those if I bring those down? Fair bit. Nice, so the highlights have actually gone pretty well there, haven't they? But I have to say that this bit is looking a bit funny, so I'm just going to address that with my mask and see if I can maybe loosen that mask off a little bit, which might keep a bit more of the dimensionality to things. We'll see what happens. Let's bring this one down too. So let me just before and after that. Yeah, not too bad. And I'm just trying to keep an eye on hills and stuff too, just to see that I've not gone too far. Yeah, it's just to me it's a little touch dark. Maybe what I'll try is a little bit of that. No, that's not done it. How about if I try a little bit of this? Ah, that's done it. Okay, so maybe needed to do that, and so needed to go up on my midtones rather than down on my midtones. It's all a little bit of a little bit of a balance, isn't it? But there's actually, it's not perfect, but there's a fair bit of detail in those clouds, and it's certainly much better. So I guess the thing that I wanted to show here is that you can double these up. I've done 2 control lines, one on top of the other, and that's perfectly fine, just selecting different things along the way. Yeah, so that's that bit. So that's the sky. Now if I close that down, so maybe I want to impact these hills here, and I think that the auto mask might be the thing to do. So I'll just come here and grab this and go auto mask, and bring that along here. Just being careful with the auto mask. If you're not familiar with it, that little central blue circle is where it's really picking up its main information. So I don't right now want to take that onto the sky at all, because then, and down here as well, I'm trying to keep it sort of on the greenery so that it's grabbing those things, and it'll not pay attention. Even though there's area that looks like it's selected out there, it's going to actually do those calculations based on what that little central circle was on as it was going. And I want to maybe just raise my shadows just a touch on those. See how that goes. Awesome. So I think that looks nice, but then it's made it look a little bit even more hazy than it was. So I'll maybe just try and drop a few points of clear view on there. Yeah, I think that's looking all right. So that's good. So that's my auto brush. And now, if I think about auto brush, what do we see? If I just suddenly, this one's selected here. If I just suddenly brush down here, what happens? You can see that, well, hopefully that showed up. It wasn't heaps. Can make it more dramatic you can see that this adopted that there. So if I undo that and I deselect this, and then I come down here and do some auto brush, see it gets its own controls, and it can be a separate entity. Just delete that one for now. What about if I take the gradient filter or graduated filter? So as different from the control line, this is an old-fashioned graduated filter that's just, it's either applied or it's fading out like that. So do that one, and I'll make this darker. And now this is selected. What if I come to the top here and do another one? Will it be a child? No, it gets its own controls. And just for argument's sake, so we can tell the difference, I'll take this one up. So with the graduated filter, the old school graduated filter, it doesn't matter if they're previously selected. It's still going to start a brand new, fresh one. Just take those off. And so we've done graduated filter, we've done control lines, control points. Control points are the same. If I put a control point here and I up my exposure, while that's selected, if I put one here, it will inherit that. If I deselect it, put a new one, it has its own. And it's different. I'll come back to the control line and control points momentarily with another feature, but right now it's just how this parent-child thing works. So we see there is definitely a parent-child thing happens with control points, with control lines, and with auto-masking. There is not a parent-child thing that happens with graduated filter. Each one is a new, fresh one. The brush tool. There we go. So that is still selected. It's blue. It's highlighted. Do another one. And it inherits. Undo. Deselect. Do another one. Doesn't inherit. It gets its own controls. Like that. Just delete those. So we've got inherits, 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 and doesn't inherit. Interesting. Now, the other thing that I wanted to show was that, so if I take this, I can, I can put a control line and I can make that big, and I can brighten that up, but let's say that I don't want it to be impacting the water, then I can hold my Alt key, and you see the little minus shows up, and if I do that, it'll tell it not to impact that watery area. So you can use minuses to change that behavior. You can have your main selection, and you can then tell it what not to include, but you can tell it that you do want it to include this. So you're including that bit, but you don't want it to include this. I'll hold Alt again. So you can kind of go through and, and I've left these really big, but you kind of get the picture. You can go through and change those behaviors. So you've got the main, you've got the addition ones and the minus ones when it comes to control points. And I'll just delete these. Boom. And with control lines, so I'll go here. What have I got here? Oh, I got a bunch. I didn't delete them all. There we go. That's taken care of all of them. With control lines, I put a control line there. And I do whatever it is I'd like to do. But the same thing, I can actually now come back here, grab a control point, and put a control point there, and that's going to tell it not to include that area in some way. No. The thing about this is you can see I've got my control line, control point business here, but I don't have a good way to impact how this is doing its selection. I can impact how this is doing its selection using the chroma and luma, but I don't, to my knowledge, have a good way to impact how this is doing its selection. And so you can see it's actually a bit sloppy there. It's actually quite tight and a little bit sloppy. So it's got its... It works in many situations, but it's not looking... There's such contrast there. It's not looking very great there. And you might need to play with things to get what you were after. All right, so I'm just cutting in on myself here. As I was editing the video, I realized I left out an important bit. I talked about using a control line and then using minus control points, and I didn't show using a control line and then using a minus control line. And it works actually reasonably similarly. But you know, this image potentially could work really well for it. And let me show you what I mean. So first of all, I just want to double check that nothing's selected, and so none of these are lighting up blue. It's not a guarantee because you can hide the equalizer, but usually if something's selected, you'll also see its equalizer. But here we go. So now nothing's selected, and I've got the control line ready to be plonked on here. So I'll do this, and that should be fine just there. And oopsie. Sorry about that. I just missed the eyedropper. I'll bring that and I put that there, and that should be fine for what I'm doing. Just doing a general thing. So let's say you make your change, and obviously this doesn't look good, but it's just I want it to be something that you can quickly and easily see. And if I press M, you can see how that mask is going. So we've got quite a bit selected out through there and through there, etc. But let's say in this instance, I don't want that water to be selected. And we've got a pretty decent sort of straight line there. So this kind of makes it a perfect possibility. So if I hold Alt down, you can hopefully, it might be a little small, but you can hopefully see that little minus symbol appears. So if I click then and kind of do it on the angle that I want, it's going to take it away. And I'll do a fairly big gradient so that it sort of softens that. Try to get my angle just right. I think that's pretty good. And grab this, and I want it to be sort of on the water, I reckon, because it's the water that I want to protect. So I'll move it to that piece because that feels like quite a representative piece, but you can move it wherever works best. And then I'll just ease that in. Watching it kind of push that edge in until I'm happy with where that edge is. And now you can see it's protecting that. Not protecting this as much, and you might, if it makes a difference to you, I can't actually see much of what's going on there, but if it makes a difference to you, you can take more action to protect that bit. For example, let's put another one on. And this time I'll put my item on here. Try to protect that, for example. So you can add these minus control lines as well. And in some instances, that might be easier than adding the control points, just by the nature of how they lay themselves out. So that's it for my inlay, and we'll get back to the regularly scheduled video. Right, so this might literally be the longest video ever, as I'm cutting back in yet again with another thing that I suddenly thought of that I could say about local adjustments. And that is, lots of times if we're doing local adjustments, we might want to use a radial filter for something. And that you can actually use the control points as a radial filter. Let me show you what I mean. So I've got control point selected here. Nothing else is selected, so it should give me a nice new fresh unit. So I'll pop that in, do that, and I'm going to press M on my keyboard so that we can see the mask. And you see what we often see when we're looking at a control point, which is, some bits are more selected than other bits. And of course, as usual, if I come over here, I've got the opportunity to change my mask and how it's, I can make it be more specific to the lighter tones or more general. But the interesting thing about these is that if you drag both of these all the way down, you'll see that it is now basically a radial mask. And you can change the size of that radial, just like that. And you can even still, if I do a minus control point, you can plunk that there and have a minus radial. It's interesting because when I was doing this, when I was just before I started recording, I always like to do these things once before to see if there's anything going to jump out at me that I'm not thinking about. And in another part of the video, I commented on how, when I did the minus control point, it was a bit jaggy. And it was no doubt a bit jaggy because the main one was a bit jaggy, because you can see here it's kind of mimicking what the main, here it's a radial in white, and this is making a radial in black. And if I start to up this a bit, we should see it sort of start to inherit that a little bit. You see how that starts to blend in. So it's still doing its work, but it's inheriting more of the nature of however this one is set up as it goes. But if it's just like that, then you get just straight on another radial filter. So, and of course, if I press M to make that go away, and then I make my adjustments, it will be just evenly in a radial sort of fashion. So maybe I wanted to dark this corner down a little bit. I could just do that. Plunk it in the corner. And I've done that one pretty subtle, but you get the idea. But it's protecting this bit up here, for example. So there we go. That's it. We'll call that a quick one and get back to the main video. So with the control points or control lines, you can add them in, but then you can also use minus control points to deselect aspects. Another thing when we're thinking about this, I've got something selected and I want to remove from that, is you can take a graduated filter, for example, and let's say that I popped a graduated filter on here and I down my exposure, but I didn't want it to impact the water. The graduated filter can be impacted by the good old-fashioned eraser tool. I'll just try for a steady hand here. Keep it fairly feathered. All right, and I'm back with things here, and you can see that upon restart, it has remembered. It's got my graduated filter and my brush, and it lets me know that both of those things are included in that space, which is handy. Keeping in mind that you can always turn those off and on there, and I can see that there's a little bit up higher that I didn't get. So if I come back to my local adjustments, and my eraser is still selected, so I can just do a little bit of that, tidy that up. But you can add your graduated filter, and then you can deselect. And something too to keep in mind is that over here as well, we've always got for the different, I could go back to the auto mask, I can go back to the control line, the second control line I did, or the first control line I did, and you can rename these if you're keen. I almost never get around to that, but if you have a lot of them, it is helpful. There have been a couple of occasions where I've done that in the past. But keep in mind that you can always reduce the opacity on these two if you decide you've gone a little bit too far. You can keep the basic adjustment there, but you can just ease it back a bit. So that's all the way gone. This is 50%, this is 100%. So you can just find that happy place that looks good. And of course, I guess I should just add that, I'll take this graduated filter off. Another fast way, before I was over here deleting multiple points, faster way would be to grab it here and press the delete key. So I should have done that when I had my numerous control points. It would have been faster and easier. But if I come here, and sometimes, I've got the brush there, it's telling me no go. You can see the little red international symbol for not going to work, because there's nothing for it to work against. But just for argument's sake here too, what I do sometimes is size even bigger. Is a nice feathered brush, and I put on where I want an adjustment to go, and I make my adjustment. Again, I'm darkening this off. And this is a fairly extreme example, but you can see here that this obviously leaks in there a bit. So if I come to my eraser, I can then, right now I'm using a mouse. It's much easier with a pen to do this, but you can if you're patient. The other thing is, if you're trying to do something that's quite difficult to do in terms of accuracy, I've already got my flow fairly low, but you can actually bring not your feathering, pardon me, I've grabbed the wrong one. You can actually bring your opacity down a bit as well. And you can just play with this to see, take that down a bit more as well. And then you can kind of just ease your way along here. See what kind of a difference you hook. and just try to chip away at that until it looks more like what you hoped. Maybe gone too far. Doesn't look like it's doing. Too impatient for this kind of editing. Let's see. There, you can see it is going, right? So you can, it's just a little bit slower than I would have liked for the video, but you get the point. You can ease it in that way. So you do your big adjustment with the brush, and then you can hook in there with the eraser tool just to get it just right. And if you're trying to get it just right and you're trying to really ease it in, I personally find it's often easier to put it on a little bit wide, a little bit sloppy, and then chip away at it with the eraser tool until you get what you're after. And I don't know what. Don't really have something I'd like to do to the sand. Give it some more contrast, make it chunky. Right. Yeah, that's too chunky. Anyway, you get the point. So hopefully that's been helpful. A little bit of a rambling walk through some of the local adjustments and how to use them. So what are the big takeaways here? Let me think for a moment. So you can multiple apply control lines. So I've got up here in the sky, I've got one over the other, and each time I've selected what I wanted to impact and then just tried to balance them out. Also on the second one, I think it was well of note that I needed to be really, so I've got my eyedropper here on sort of white stuff, but I needed to be really careful with how these gray tones went. And you saw the fact that I needed to sort of try to balance these things out. So I brought my highlights down, but then I needed to shift my midtones up because they were just not looking quite right. So we've got that for the control lines. You can put them over top with the control points. We've got, the fact that once again, you can add add to your selection with your chroma and luma. You can press M on your keyboard to see specifically what is getting selected at any time. And you can always hold down your Alt key to add a negative control point, and that's going to remove whatever the tones are in that area where you put the negative control point from the overall selection. And also when you get a bunch of, because it's not the first time I've done that, where I get a bunch of these control points on there, if you want to delete them all quickly, the fastest way is just to come up here. And oh, I see. I nearly deleted it because I didn't deselect this one. This is actually a child. Did you see what I did there? So it's a tricky thing to be careful of, and certainly not the first time I've done that as well. That control point that I added is a child of this one up here. So in that case, I don't want to delete that whole thing, because then I'll delete this one that I did want, if that makes sense. So as I was putting a control point down here, what I should have done, given my intent, was I should have clicked on this to deselect it. Now I've got a fresh one. So good little bit of reminder there, because it's so easy to do. Even, I have a lot of hours with the software, and I still do it every now and again, where I drop the point in as a child, and I don't want it to be a child. So what did we see? We saw that child situation applies for everything except for the graduated filter. Every time you put a graduated filter, it will be a new graduated filter. And we saw that with the graduated filters and the brushes, that we can always put them in and then remove from them gently with the eraser to get more of what we're hoping for in terms of our selection. I guess the other thing that stands out to me is that when you're working with your selections, with your masking, and if you get to the point where you're up here and trying to impact your chroma and luma and whatnot, that often small adjustments are important. And as you're going, watch out for haloing, which does sometimes. So it depends on the contrast that's going on, etc. But sometimes it will halo, and oftentimes that can be fixed just by some gentle maneuvers with these. So awesome. So hopefully that has been helpful. Please do. I have no fantasies that I will have covered everything possible on this topic. I just sort of did a brain dump of what was with me. So please feel free in the comments if there's something I've missed out or something with local adjustments that you've had good luck with. Please drop it in there. It's always great to see other ideas from other people who have been using the software. So with that, I will say thanks so much. Keep your eyes open. This is sort of the first video of 2 that I'll have coming out in rapid succession, so I'll see you again soon. Bye-bye.